Hey guys, welcome back to more crazy Karen stories. In this video, my neighbor Karen pulled a gun on me over an electric bill and triggered a police raid that uncovered something insane in her basement. This is how a petty argument led to a 1 in a million discovery. Let's dive right into the video. The first one is titled, "Cop makes huge discovery after neighbor Karen pulls gun on me." So I'm initially from Nicaragua, but I've spent some time abroad when I was going through college. Geographically, I didn't go far. As far as things like politics and infrastructure go, I might have as well been on a different planet though. I went to the United States for my studies, and while there, I learned how much of the general populace is unused to crime existing around them. Often this is because a lot of this nation is privileged, but even in cases where crime is present, they just brush it out of their mind. After graduation, I spent a bit of time working in the States before I got an opportunity to work from Nicaragua. So this meant I got to return home in a very privileged position and was able to get my own house and live quite comfortably with all the comforts, as if I had plucked my house out of the US and just dropped it in the middle of Managua. And by the way guys, as far as I know, Managua, or however you pronounce it, is the capital of Nicaragua. Even if I had my little slice of the States, I certainly was still in my home country. The capital is rife with cartel or gang activity that the government tries to keep as peaceful as possible through cooperation. My neighborhood had a lot of suspicious characters, and I did what I could to keep my eyes turned away from them. My work was related to the government, so there was a quiet peace treaty. I avoided being nosy, and I wouldn't be worth any trouble. My next-door neighbor made this hard sometimes though. Not that I wanted to be nosy, but she would practically demand my attention at times when I felt it would be best if I was completely out of sight. Karen works well enough as a Spanish as well as an English name, so we will just call her that. She behaved enough like one after all. Considering I lived alone and had a dinky little car, I had a small driveway and a punny one-car garage. I definitely like not having to leave the shelter of my house in the stormy seasons, where I would get drenched on the way to my car as often as not. Karen would often have cars load up her entire driveway and front yard, and since my driveway bordered our property line, she would take to parking there right before such events occurred. If it was one of her visitors that parked in my driveway and was gone before morning, it would not be worth bringing up any issue about it. However, she made sure it was her car that was there, and that led to quite a few mornings where I had to go and knock on her front door in an utter deluge of rain to ask her to move her car. Even the smell of rain in the air was often not enough to overpower the stench of substance abuse that surrounded her hungover self on these mornings. Alcohol, cocaine, and a cocktail of other party drugs that made it clear the topic of her evening events. She would act erratic on these mornings, but I was used to people who seemed the most dangerous sober, so I never really worried that she would behave strangely. She once lined up her car with me and gunned the engine, and I just raised my eyebrows before she cackled and finished moving to her driveway. Another time she answered the door and opened a switchblade aimed at my chest. She told me, "I promised myself I would stop the next person who woke me up before I was ready to." I responded to that by holding my hand out as an easy target, to which she laughed and pocketed the blade. These parties were not the only instances where she had visitors though. She would often have vans pull up in her driveway and have a collection of characters blaring music and blatantly moving some unmarked product in or out of her house. If Karen was sober, then this would most often only be notable because the truck drivers themselves blared music so loud and for so long that in the US they would have had the police called on them just for that. If Karen was high, then even the members of the neighborhood that seemed to be career criminals either stayed home or stayed away. She would challenge anyone within sight of her property, even if they didn't want anything to do with her. She would storm over, and if you couldn't drive away in time, you were liable to have her challenge you to run her over, as she spouted extravagant threats if anyone reported what they said or acted like a soplon. Another thing you learn from living in a country where crime is so commonplace is the ones who threaten and posture are the ones with the least ability to harm you most of the time. Still, when she would trespass or steal things from me, I would stand up for myself. I think the driveway situation is the most obvious example of this, but I also had once or twice when I caught her trying to tap into my power on nights when she had her parties. I would quickly unplug her or confront her while she was drunkenly fumbling with her equipment and kick her back to her party, often with her spitting at me as she left or shaking a fist at me from her yard when I would unplug the siphon on my own. Like almost anything else, she would end these interactions with a cackle and then act like I was in on the joke and that the two of us were pals. Even with all her strange behavior, I knew I was likely to just get something weirder if I ever tried to move. I stuck around and spent years dealing with her antics and doing everything I could to turn a blind eye. One thing I never did was call the police. Even with my government job, I would only do that if I truly thought my life could be in danger, because otherwise bringing police presence to the street would start to build resentment for the people who wanted nothing to do with the men in uniform. Well, Karen finally acted erratic enough that the cops felt like the only option. One morning, I came out to find her car in my driveway. Nothing too out of the ordinary, considering I could hear the music from their party the night before, even though I had turned in early. However, I also had received my electric bill that day and found that I was paying triple the usual. I went to the line and found that Karen had upgraded her equipment. She had tapped into my power line for possibly weeks given the effect on my bill, and the equipment was complex enough that I didn't know right away how to disconnect it without potentially harming my own power line. So I went to ask her to move her car and remove the power tap. I knew she would likely threaten an or what if I asked her to disconnect from my power, so I made the poor decision to call 118, like 911 in the US, into my cell phone. So I show up at her doorstep and she comes to the door, smelling like a skunk who took a liking to tequila. I figure weed means she might be more relaxed than if it were a night of cocaine. She opened the door to me and waved me off. Yeah, OP, I'll be right over to move my car. That's fine, Karen, but I also need you to disconnect from my power line, I replied. She raised her eyebrows like she was taken aback. You don't normally come all the way over here to ask. Why don't you remove it yourself? Which of course was the bluff I didn't want called. I have work to do and I'm tired of having to do more work just to make up for the fact that you cannot leave me and my property alone. OP, you need to loosen up. I don't know why you haven't ever joined in with my parties. We would love to ruin a stick in the mud. Karen, I need you to disconnect from my power line, I replied. But first get your car out of my way so I can go to work. She laughed and swayed a bit. What are you gonna do if you come home from work and I'm still using your power? Maybe I will turn all my lights on and bring your bill up some more. I held up my phone with the emergency number already dialed. Well, I will have to take this to higher authorities then. I don't know if I was tired or just being too nostalgic about my time in the States, but this obviously set Karen off. And I'll admit this was the one thing that I figured was enough of a mistake that I actually feared for my life. Karen's face went stony. She reached around the side of the door and pulled out a gun. I thought fast when I saw the weapon and raised my hands and dropped the phone. Before I dropped it though, I quickly clicked the button to put the call through. I was terrified that she would notice, but I just tried to keep her looking at me so she wouldn't pick up the phone and find that it was an inactive call. Karen, I didn't mean it. I would not call the cops on you. You know that I don't have any issue with what you do on your property. I just want you to stop dipping into my power. I would not call the police over that, I promise. The fear on my face was not an act, of course. Karen started screaming, "You damn privileged a-hole. You turned down my offers of hospitality. You think you're better than all the people of your own country just because you spent a couple years with the gringos. I don't, Karen. I don't think I'm better than you." I fit my pleas in where I could. You forgot where you are though, huh? Didn't you? You really think that the police will help you here? I'm tired of your privileged behavior just because you work for the sunny side of the government. We are all the same here, you dumb idiot. My legs started shaking and I lowered myself to my knees. Karen, I don't want anything bad to happen. I especially don't want attention drawn to the neighborhood. Let's not do anything hasty. I'm sure you won't draw attention if I just put a bullet through your hand or maybe your knee. You can stitch yourself back up and leave me the F alone. I don't remember all the details of the conversation once it got so much further, but I do remember that right before the sirens came into range, where I could hear them, I finally heard her cackle, which generally means she has been putting on an act. Of course, then she heard the sirens too, and Karen's eyes widened. She seemed to sober up quickly. She threw a few curses my way and rushed into her house. I figured she was probably fine if she was found in possession. She might get a rap on the wrist and some of them surrendered into evidence, but she would be fine. The cops came, and even though I tried to claim the situation had been false, they had heard Karen during her screaming fit and they ended up rushing into her house. I didn't realize that anything was out of the ordinary until the ambulance showed up a few minutes later and a young girl was brought out of Karen's house by one of the police officers. From what I was told, they found this girl in a basement of some sort. Apparently, the gang that Karen is involved with is a smaller one, and they had kidnapped the child of a higher-up in a larger gang in order to get leverage on some trade routes. Karen apparently did not connect the dots that this was not a good time to falsely threaten a neighbor with a gun, and as a result the kid was found. Most of the information I have is rumors, because whoever was behind the kidnapping let all the blame fall on Karen's shoulders and she was put in prison. Good riddance, I guess. And the next one is another story, this time from r/askreddit, about a redditor getting kidnapped. And by the way, if you enjoyed the story so far, please don't forget to like the video, because it would help me tremendously if we could reach 1000 likes on the video. A few years ago, I was in Prague with a couple of my friends. We were backpacking across Eastern Europe and Prague was the second stop. It had been a long train ride from Amsterdam, so we went out to start celebrating quite early. I, in particular, probably went a little hard too fast, and by 10 PM I was quite drunk and the constant smoking amplified my feels for the day. There were also a few shots of absinthe that were taken. There's always a debate whether they make you hallucinate or not, but there's no debate that they make you really drunk. The next few parts of the night are still a blur, but somehow I left my friends and found myself walking around on the street outside the bar we had been in. Something happened, rather I probably did something, that started an altercation of sorts with a random stranger. We were able to mesh it quite peacefully, but not after some loud noises and causing quite a scene. I decided to walk away to kind of just get away from the area in case any trouble arrived. I was walking down a quiet side alley that I remember from earlier in the day that led to my hotel when an unmarked white van creeped past me. Now mind you, my friends and I had idiotically just watched all of the Hostel movies before we had left for Europe, and by the way, I really recommend those movies, so that whole kidnapping thing was still fresh in my mind. I started walking faster and faster, almost came to a running pace when I thought I was just overreacting and that the van was long gone. Well, less than a few seconds later, I hear brakes screeching behind me and turn to see 3 large guys running towards me and the same white van parked right behind them. They grabbed me and threw me inside the van before I even knew what was up. I was completely scared at this point and tried to reason with the 4 guys in the van, but they didn't speak a lick of English, or at least didn't respond to my pleas. We drove a few blocks until we came to a stoplight, and I decided this was my last chance to make a break for it, or else I was completely screwed. I dove over one of the guys sitting next to me and straight out the van door that I somehow managed to open fairly quickly. I got maybe half a block before the guy caught up to me and tackled me. I looked around and tried to scream to any onlookers to help, but of course there was no one around to be seen. They handcuffed me in the van the rest of the way, and we got to some building, very old, and the hallways we walked in looked old and dilapidated. I was still freaking out too much to think sanely or getting any real bearings of the place. They tried talking to me for a bit, but I couldn't make out the few English words they said to me, so they took me to a prison cell-esque room and started tying me down on a bed. There was blood on the headrest of this bed, and this was the moment I started realizing that something really bad was gonna happen to me from that point on. They left to go do something for a few minutes, and in those few minutes it was life or death time for me. Still, to this day, I look back at those few minutes and really admire myself and what I tried to do. You always think that when you are in a life or death situation, you will fight to survive any which way you can, but you don't really know until you are actually in one. I started trying to take off the straps immediately. There were 2 on my wrists and 2 around my ankles. I kicked and wiggled and did everything that was humanly possible to get out of those leather shackles. I was able to get off the 2 feet shackles within a few minutes and started focusing everything I had on my wrists. I've never fought harder to do anything in my entire life. I was fully convinced that in a few minutes I would be dead if I didn't get this done right at this moment. Somehow, I was able to get the shackles off my wrists while skinning them in the process. I had blood pouring out of cuts from both my wrists and ankles, but I was free of them. I went over to the window and punched right through it, but to my utter dismay, there were bars right behind it. There was nothing I could do. I was completely trapped with no chance of escape. My captors heard the commotion and came running into my room. They grabbed me and tied me down to the bed again, and this time put 1 strap over my chest, leaving me effectively unable to wiggle or move. This was it. I was done for. In the next few moments, I made peace with death for the first time in my life. A beautiful wave of peace washed through my entire body, and I laid in my bed feeling completely okay with the world. I thought about my parents and my friends and hoped that they would at least learn of my death and not left wondering what happened to me. I thought about my dog and hoped that she wouldn't think I just abandoned her. I thought about quite a few things, but all with a peaceful heart. An hour or what felt like an hour passed and no one came. I thought for sure they would have begun skinning me alive by this point, or whatever sick torture device they would have chosen for me. This was also around the time I started getting sober and that damn alcohol started leaving my mind. A few things I had previously been oblivious to started coming into focus. This place I was in was not as dilapidated and abandoned as I had previously thought. I could hear noises of people coming from down the hallway, and it reminded me of a public place, not a dilapidated kill house that I'd convinced myself I was in. The street outside my now broken window also seemed quite alive. It was around this time that two of my captors decided to come into my room again, and I started realizing that they were not gonna kill me. They came into my room wearing ratchety looking lab coats, but on these coats was also name tags. The next few minutes everything started making a little sense. They gave me a breathalyzer, cleaned up my cuts and bandaged them. Afterwards they took me out to a waiting room with quite a few people in it, gave me my clothes back as well as a nice ticket for public intoxication and a hefty bill for my stay. A couple things I've learned from my first day in a Prague prison/hospital. I'm never drinking alcohol ever again. I'm never watching effed up movies that scare the crap out of me before a vacation again. And I'm pretty sure that if/when I am in an actual life and death situation, I will have the will to fight for my survival. That was my most effed up night ever and the strongest instance of fear I've ever felt. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. One thing I love about my neighborhood, and the main reason that my husband and I picked it, was due to its safety. Low crime rates, not too much car traffic, etc. My kids are 9 and 11 years old and love to ride around on nice days. As soon as we learned that they both had an affinity for getting on their bikes, we spent a ton of time going over rules and safety for them to learn. About keeping themselves safe but also being aware of others around them. The reasoning behind it all being they wouldn't run into anybody or create problems. Also, we had a rule that they had to stay together if they were going out on their own. For the first month or so, one of us would secretly follow them to see if they were following our rules, and they were doing a great job. As long as they stayed in the area, we talked about it, it seemed fine for them to go off on their own. One day, I got the mail and had a letter from the local HOA, which we are not members of. I figured it was an offer or something and almost threw it out, but decided to open it because of the word urgent on the front. The letter went into detail talking about how my sons were little demons on their bikes and were not allowed to ride them in the neighborhood. That the sidewalk was for walking, the streets were for cars, and that was it. Following up with some bylaws that did not matter to me because we were not members. I wanted to just scoff and ignore it, but the fact that they were talking legal action and bringing my sons into this, I wanted to get a lawyer to make sure things were handled properly. I had a friend who worked in law and I gave him the letter just to get an idea of what he thought. He agreed that since I was not in the HOA, I should have never received this warning. Before I went crazy and hired a lawyer in that field, I wanted to go and speak to the HOA president. I wanted to believe that maybe he was confused about us not being members. I got a meeting with him and just calmly explained that I think he made a mistake and my family was not part of the HOA, so my kids didn't need to follow the rules that were laid out by them. The president then basically told me that it didn't matter if I was a member or not, and I had to follow the rules and keep my kids under control. He said that if he saw them riding bikes in his neighborhood again, he would call the cops to file a report and then sue us. I could tell by his tone and words that there was no reasoning with this guy, but I wasn't gonna stop my kids from riding their bikes and enjoying themselves. What I did do, since I was worried as a parent, was watch my kids from a distance again. I felt them having freedom was important, and me breathing down their necks while they had fun was not good for anybody. But I was worried that they would try something and wanted to be ready to jump in if that happened. The HOA did file a lawsuit against us and we had to get a lawyer in order to fight them right back. They had zero legal standing since we were not in the HOA, so I had no idea what they were planning or trying to play at. The entire lawsuit against us was frivolous to the point that I'm shocked that they even found a lawyer willing to represent them. They were suing us to pay fines for breaking the HOA rules, but also claiming that my boys were a danger to their community. Apparently, he had some video evidence that proved it. But before he even had a chance to argue that the judge was ready to shut down his claims for getting us to pay money or face other consequences for not following the HOA, saying it was clear we were not members. He did allow the video to get played, and I'm kind of glad he did because I want to share the dangers my boys posed in this video. They were in our driveway before they even left to ride bikes, while my oldest one showed the younger one that he learned how to pop a wheelie. Something I knew about and they knew not to do while riding around because it was not very safe. That was the entire video. It did not even show them on the bikes off of my private property, and the judge was not happy about this, and of course dismissed the case as being a total waste of time and the HOA having zero claim to get money out of me or to force me to stop my boys from riding their bikes. I was angry after the trial mainly because it meant they were stalking my home in order to get that video of my boys. I filed a lawsuit against them for harassment, abuse of process, and violation of my family's rights, including the right to privacy, because stalking outside my house to take a video of my underage kids, no matter what the context is super creepy. While things were getting dug up for the counter lawsuit, there was something interesting that came up for us to use against him. Months back, I had reported a car for speeding down the road dangerously on many occasions. I'm talking like 20 miles per hour over and not even staying on the right side of the road. Well, it turns out that it was the president who I reported, and he got saddled with fines and even lost his license for a while. That was our ace in our hole, because during the lawsuit while under oath, he was getting asked if he had any type of vendetta against me or my family. He denied it until that report was brought up, and he knew that he was totally screwed. Basically, in that one moment the entire thing was won in our favor. We were going to get money from the HOA as compensation for the financial and emotional stress and burden the whole situation caused for us. The HOA president had to personally issue us a formal apology as well and step down from his position as the president of the HOA. If he didn't, he would have been forced out, which just looks way worse on paper. But he was not the only person in the HOA going down because of this. All the other board members were compliant in what he was doing. They knew that we were not members, and they were filing false reports and abusing power. They were all asked to step down, meaning that the HOA was getting an entirely new set of people to run it. We still never joined the HOA, but we did find out that the new HOA passed some bylaws to keep power more in check and things that would stop a lawsuit from going as far as ours did if it is clear that the other party is not even a member of the HOA. No problem for us or for my kids to ride around on their bikes anymore and have a great time. I still think it's crazy that in order to get revenge on me for getting him in trouble for doing something illegal, he went so far to try and get back at me. Like, I don't know if this guy has ever heard of a prank before, but they are not meant to be this elaborate. Plus, if I didn't know it was his car I called the police on, how would I even know that the whole thing was meant for revenge? I cannot learn my lesson if I was clueless to the real cause on his side of it. A total idiot of a man that I'm glad is not in charge of anybody anymore, because personally, I would not put him in charge of a toaster. And before we end the video, let's read one last funny story from r/malicious compliance. It is titled, "Boss said, dress for the job you want, so I started wearing a CEO costume to my retail job." So I work at a mid-tier clothing store, and our district manager came through last month giving us the usual corporate prep talk. During the meeting, she kept emphasizing how we should dress for the job you want, not the job you have, and think like leaders. Now, our dress code is pretty relaxed, basically just look professional and wear something from our store. Most of us wear jeans and a nice top or sweater from our inventory. I decided to take her advice literally though, started showing up in full business formal tailored suits, thrifted because retail wages, dress shirts, ties, you know the works. I even bought a cheap briefcase that I carry around the store, which I got from a cash out on Grizzly's Quest. At first, customers started assuming I was the manager and would come to me with complaints and returns. I would politely redirect them, but it was happening constantly. My actual manager seemed confused but couldn't really say anything since I was following dress code and the DM's advice. The best part was when the DM came back for her monthly visit, she saw me restocking shelves in my full suit and tie, briefcase sitting nearby, and just stared for like 10 seconds. She asked my manager about it and he just shrugged and said, "She is dressing for the job she wants." Now half my coworkers have started wearing more formal clothes too, and our store apparently has the most professional looking team in the district. The DM has not mentioned the dress code since. And yeah guys, thank you for watching, I will see you again tomorrow.